The heat was unbearable. In Scottsdale, Arizona, midday wasn't just hot. It was punishing. The pavement shimmered like glass, the air thick with the kind of dry stillness that made everything feel slower, heavier. Rick, a 41-year-old auto mechanic, was just walking back to his truck after grabbing a bite to eat, squinting against the glare. It was supposed to be an ordinary afternoon, the kind you forget by dinner. But not this one. As he neared his truck, something felt off. His eyes scanned the row of vehicles, most parked neatly in their spots, quiet and unremarkable. Except one. A silver sedan sat crooked across two lines, like it had been abandoned in haste. The windows were up, not even cracked. No shade, no breeze. It was a sealed box baking under the merciless sun. Rick's pace slowed, his gut tightened. At first he thought maybe someone had left the car just for a moment, ran into a store, maybe. But then he saw it. A flicker. A blur of movement behind the glass. Something small shifted in the back seat, barely visible through the haze of sun-warped glass. Rick blinked. Was it just a shadow? He stepped closer. And then he saw her. Curled up on the back seat, panting hard, a tiny German Shepherd puppy lay limp against the leather. Her coat, black and tan, was matted with sweat. Her chest rose and fell in quick, shallow bursts, like each breath took more effort than the last. Her pink tongue hung out, dry and cracked. Her body was small, too small, maybe 4 months old. A baby. She saw him and pressed her paws to the window, as if she recognized something, anything that wasn't heat or silence. Her paw prints were everywhere, smudged across the glass in frantic repetition. It was as if she'd been trying to write a message only the heart could read. Rick's breath caught in his throat. She didn't bark, didn't scratch. She just stared at him, wide-eyed, hollow, like she'd already stopped hoping. For a moment, Rick couldn't move. He knelt beside the car, his knees touching the roasting asphalt, and stared back at her. His heart hammered. He'd seen car crashes, fires, people pulled from twisted metal at 80 miles an hour, but nothing, not one thing had ever looked like this. A puppy, locked in a death trap under the midday sun, too weak to cry. He looked around the parking lot. Deserted. The strip mall next door was quiet, almost abandoned. The storefront nearest him had a dusty for lease sign taped to the window. No movement, no sound, just sun and silence. Rick fumbled for his phone and called 911. His hands trembled as he gave the plate number, described the scene. Puppy in the back seat, he said. Not moving, not barking, just dying. The dispatcher promised help was on the way. He ended the call and lowered himself to the ground again, resting his forehead on the hot door frame. Through the window, the puppy blinked slowly, her eyes half closed, her body trembled in slow waves. "Hold on, sweetheart," he whispered. "Help's coming." She didn't move, just pressed her forehead to the glass, a soft, fragile gesture, like surrender. Rick didn't know her name, not yet, but he felt something in that moment. A thread, invisible but strong, tying him to her. There was fire in her still, a will to survive. He could feel it pulsing faintly through the glass. The sun beat down on the metal. The heat was impossible. Rick leaned against the car door, feeling it burn through his shirt. His hands sizzled just from resting on the window frame. Inside, it had to be over 120 degrees. He could see it, heat waves distorting the air, the vinyl seats blistered and sagging, the plastic steering wheel warping under the pressure. The entire car was an oven, and in the middle of it all, the tiny pup trying to hang on. "Come on, baby," he murmured. "Stay with me." He tapped the glass gently. Her ears flicked, a tiny motion. Hope. Her head lolled to the side, too heavy to lift. Her limbs were stiff, her paws curled inwards as if they were too sore to move anymore. The pads were red and raw, burned from pressing against the glass for too long. Rick's heart clenched. He glanced around. A few people were passing by now, coming and going from the shops. Most didn't even glance at the car. One man, dressed in a pressed white shirt and slacks, paused and looked at Rick. "It's just a dog," the man said with a shrug. Rick turned, his face a storm. "She's a puppy," he snapped. "She's alive." The man raised his eyebrows and walked away. Rick stared after him, shocked, furious. How could someone see this and do nothing? Desperate, Rick tried the door handle. Locked, of course. He went around the car, trying each door. Nothing. Every handle scorched his palm. He considered breaking the window. He had tools. He could grab a wrench, smash the glass. But what if it shattered toward her? What if it hurt her more? He hesitated. Instead, he dropped to his knees again and pressed his forehead to the glass. His voice cracked. "My name's Rick," he said. "I've got 2 kids. We've got a backyard and a cold bowl of water waiting. You just got to hang on, okay?" She didn't answer, but her ear moved, just a little. Rick stared at her, memorizing every detail. The way her fur stuck to her sides, the slight twitch in her paws, the way she was trembling. Her body was giving up, but her eyes, there was still something there. She was silent, but not gone. Then, faint, barely there, a sound, a siren. Rick stood up, squinting into the heat. The whine of the rescue vehicle grew louder, closer. His heart raced. He ran into the middle of the lot, waving both arms. "Over here!" he shouted. "She's not moving!" The fire truck rolled in fast. 2 firefighters jumped out before it even stopped. One carried a wedge tool, long and flat. The other had gloves and a scanner. They moved quickly, professionally, but Rick could see it on their faces. This was urgent. One peered through the window and muttered, "She's fading." Rick stepped back. He couldn't breathe. The tool slid into the door. One of the firefighters worked it with quick, practiced movements. Rick clenched his fists. Then, click, the lock popped. The door opened, and a blast of heat rolled out, thick and suffocating. Inside, the puppy didn't move. Her body lay curled in the corner, fur singed where it touched the seat. Her breath, if it was there at all, was so faint Rick could barely see her chest rise. One firefighter reached in, scooping her up carefully. "I've got her," he said. He turned and handed her to Rick. She didn't squirm, didn't bark, just collapsed into his arms like all the fight had drained from her body. Rick held her close, feeling the heat radiate off her. Her heartbeat was there, barely, but it was there. That was enough. For now. Rick held the puppy close, his arms cradling her like she was made of glass. She weighed next to nothing, her small frame limp against his chest. Her fur was scorching to the touch, the heat having soaked into every inch of her. She didn't struggle, didn't make a sound. Her body sagged into his arms like she had let go somewhere along the way, like survival had become too heavy. But her heart still beat, soft, fragile but steady. The firefighter beside him was talking, pointing toward the truck, explaining something about the closest shelter equipped for emergency care. Rick barely registered the words. The world had narrowed to the bundle in his arms, this tiny broken creature who hadn't even made a noise during her rescue, a puppy with scorched paws and a heartbeat hanging by a thread. The firefighter gestured toward the rescue vehicle, and Rick didn't hesitate. They climbed in together. One of the crew members radioed ahead to Maricopa County Animal Care and Control, letting them know they were en route with a critical intake. Another gently placed a thermal blanket on Rick's lap, motioning for him to keep holding her close. They didn't offer a crate or box. It was as if they knew she needed more than medical help. She needed someone to stay. Inside the rescue van, the temperature was cool and clinical, a sharp contrast to the furnace-like car they had pulled her from. But Rick was sweating, not from heat, but from adrenaline, from fear, from the weight of holding something so close to death. Scarlet, he didn't know her name yet, but it had started to form in his mind, trembled in small, uncontrolled spasms. Her breath rattled softly, a sound more felt than heard. "You're okay now, sweetheart," Rick whispered, brushing a hand over her ears. "I've got you." He wasn't saying it to comfort her. He was saying it because it was true. In that moment, she was his. And somehow, he felt like she was the only thing anchoring him to the present. Everything else, his job, the truck, the routine, blurred into the background. All he could think about was her. Her eyes remained half-closed, lids fluttering. Every few seconds her body would twitch, a soft involuntary jerk. Rick adjusted her gently, careful not to jostle her more than necessary. He could still feel the heat radiating off her fur. The rescue driver didn't speak, but the siren overhead wailed on, clearing a path through city streets. When they arrived at the shelter, the staff was already waiting. A gurney sat just outside the double doors, flanked by 2 vet techs and a woman holding an IV bag. They moved fast, calm, practiced, but Rick could feel the tension humming in the air. One of the techs took her from his arms with the kind of gentleness you reserve for glass ornaments or newborn babies. Another wrapped her in cooling towels. Someone clipped a sensor to her ear. Another inserted a small needle into her leg. Rick followed them through the doors without being asked. His hands felt empty, his arms cold. He didn't know what to do except trail behind her, unwilling to let her out of his sight. "Do you want to fill out a witness form?" A staff member asked softly. Rick nodded but didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the gurney rolling through the hallway. Just before Scarlet disappeared behind the swinging exam room doors, something happened. Her head turned, just slightly. She looked back, and in that moment a vet tech said quietly, almost like she wasn't even sure why, "Scarlet." Rick blinked. "What? She's got fire in her," the tech said, her eyes still on the pup. "She's still fighting." Scarlet. The name clicked into place like it had always been there. Scarlet, a fierce, fragile flame trapped behind glass, refusing to go out. Rick sat in the waiting room, hands trembling, his breath shallow. Every second felt like an hour. The images replayed on loop, the shimmer of heat inside the car, the warped steering wheel, the paw prints on the glass. He couldn't shake the way she'd pressed her head to the window, quietly, hopelessly. Not barking, not crying, just waiting. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the door that separated him from her. His shirt was soaked with sweat and his palms wouldn't stop twitching. He didn't care about anything else. Not the time. Not the form on the clipboard sitting beside him. Just her. After what felt like forever, a voice broke through. "She's stable." Rick stood up too fast. His knees buckled, and he had to catch himself on the edge of a chair. "She's sleeping now," the vet added. "She held on longer than most would have. You got there just in time." Rick nodded, swallowing the lump rising in his throat. He didn't trust his voice. He turned and sat down again, this time slower, his body sinking into the chair like he'd just run a marathon. Relief hit him like a wave, but it didn't make him feel better. It just made him more tired. That night, he didn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, curled in the car, paw pressed to the glass, eyes barely open. The silence, the heat, the moment she melted into his arms. The next morning, Rick was back at the shelter before they even opened. He hadn't planned it. He just drove there, pulled into the lot, and waited. When the staff saw him, they smiled knowingly. "She's alert today," one of the techs said. "Still tired, but hungry. You want to see her?" He didn't speak, just nodded. They led him down a quiet hallway, away from the main kennels, to a small recovery room. Inside, Scarlet lay on a soft blanket, an IV still taped to her paw. Her chest rose and fell steadily. Her fur had been brushed gently. Her ears twitched. The moment she saw him, her eyes widened. Not much, but enough. He dropped to his knees beside her. "Hey, baby girl." The tech opened the kennel, and Rick held his hand out slowly. Scarlet sniffed it, then leaned forward and touched her nose to his wrist. It was the smallest gesture, but it broke something open inside him. They brought her a bowl of water, and she drank like she hadn't seen water in days. Maybe she hadn't. When they took the bowl away, she rested her chin on his hand and didn't move. Rick stayed there for hours. He didn't speak, didn't need to. Her presence filled the room. They told him she had no microchip, no collar, no name until yesterday. No one had called. No one was looking. "She's lucky you found her," a volunteer said. Rick looked down at her. At the tiny body with the faint heartbeat, at the eyes that had already seen too much. "A few more minutes," the volunteer added, but didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. That night, Rick sat in his truck in silence. No radio, no thoughts, just the weight of everything he'd seen and the puppy he couldn't stop thinking about. She didn't know his name, didn't know his story, but Scarlet had chosen him. The second their eyes met through the glass, something had shifted, and now Rick was terrified of what would happen if he had to walk away. By the third day, Scarlet could stand. It wasn't graceful. Her legs were shaky, and her paws, still raw from burns, trembled with each step. But she stood, looked around the quiet recovery room, and blinked slowly, as if seeing the world for the first time. Rick was already there, sitting in his usual spot beside her kennel, a paperback in his lap, though he hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. The shelter staff watched her progress closely, adjusting her medication, changing her bandages with gentle hands. They'd moved her into a larger kennel now, one with a glass wall facing the hallway. A space reserved for pups no longer in critical condition, but still needing quiet. It was a sign. Scarlet was getting stronger. Rick came every morning. He didn't bring gifts or make a big fuss. He just came. He read out loud sometimes, told her about his day, described the customers who came into his shop, the way the carburetor on the Mustang kept acting up. Scarlet would lie there listening, eyes half-lidded, ears flicking now and then. She didn't move much, but she always noticed when he entered, always looked up when he said her name. One morning, while sipping coffee from a paper cup and watching her chew slowly on a donated rubber bone, Rick noticed something. Scarlet had stopped mid-chew. She stood up slowly, padding over to the glass wall that separated her from the hallway. She pressed her nose gently against the surface, not fogging it up, not scratching or barking, just looking, not at him, not at anyone, just through. He watched her stand there for nearly a full minute, completely still. Eyes wide, silent. A tech passing by noticed too. She glanced at Rick and said, "Some puppies, after trauma, they fixate on the thing that scared them the most. Sometimes they never stop." Rick nodded, even though his throat felt tight. He didn't say anything, just watched Scarlet as she stood by the glass. Her reflection looked like a shadow of the dog she'd been in the car, small, tired, a flicker of something still processing fear. He didn't call her name. Something in his gut told him not to interrupt. Not yet. Later that afternoon, during a quiet brushing session, her fur growing softer, cleaner, Rick found himself talking. Not about her, but about himself. The words came slow at first, halting, like they hadn't been used in a long time. "When I was 9, he said quietly, "I used to hide in the garage." Scarlet didn't react. She just blinked, her head resting against his thigh. "My dad wasn't the kind you waited up for," Rick continued. "So I'd sit behind the lawnmower, just listening to cars outside. Felt safer out there than in the house." He paused, surprised at the crack in his voice. "I didn't mean to tell you that," he whispered. But Scarlet didn't move, didn't flinch. She just listened. It wasn't the first time she had a way of pulling things from him, things he hadn't planned on sharing, things he hadn't said aloud in years. Maybe it was her silence. Maybe it was the way she never looked away when he spoke. Like she understood something deeper. Like she recognized pain. She wasn't just healing. She was teaching him how to heal too. Rick had no idea that someone had filmed the rescue. A grainy, shaky clip taken from across the parking lot by a bystander. He hadn't noticed anyone there. His focus had been solely on Scarlet, but the video made its way online. Someone posted it to TikTok. Then it was shared again and again. By the end of the week, it had over 2 million views. Rick only found out when he walked into the shelter one morning, and a volunteer grinned, holding up their phone. "You've gone viral," they said. Rick blinked. "What?" 2 million views. TikTok, Reddit, Instagram. People are calling her the Glass Angel. He stared at the screen as they played the video. It showed the fire crew opening the car, the heat pouring out, the way Scarlet's limp body collapsed into his arms. Someone had added soft piano music, overlaid with text. She waited, and someone came. Rick watched it in silence. The comments were a tidal wave of emotion. "I'm crying at my desk. How can people be so cruel and others so kind? This puppy deserves the whole world." One comment stood out. It was simple, plain font, no emojis. He didn't just save her, she saved him too. Rick read it again, and again that night. It sat in his chest like a stone. Was that true? He'd gone back to work part-time, fixed a couple of transmissions, replaced a serpentine belt, but he wasn't the same. He found himself staring at the garage doors longer than usual, listening more to the silence than the clanging tools, waiting for something, though he didn't know what. And when he wasn't working, he was at the shelter, sitting next to Scarlet's kennel, letting her fall asleep on his boots, watching her play with new toys, hesitant at first, as if joy was something foreign. Like it might break if she touched it too fast. She was getting stronger, her walk was steadier, her eyes brighter, but the glass wall still caught her gaze now and then. She would walk toward it slowly, nose almost touching, and just stare, like she was making sure it was still there, like she needed to remember. Visitors started asking about her. Is she up for adoption? What's her story? Can we meet her? And Rick would say the same thing every time. She's not ready. But deep down, he wasn't sure if he meant her or himself. One afternoon, a child's drawing appeared, taped to the shelter's front door, a crayon sketch of a puppy in a sunlit yard. The caption read, For the window dog. I hope she's happy now. No name. Just a folded corner marked from Lily, age 6. More followed. Envelopes, cards, notes from classrooms, boxes of treats shipped from 3 states away, handwritten letters with words of love and hope. The shelter staff began pinning them on the wall beside a printed photo of Scarlet, sleeping in Rick's lap. One letter in neat purple ink stood out. Lined paper, child's handwriting. Dear Scarlet, I saw you on the internet. My mom says you're very brave. I was scared once too when I got lost at the store. I cried until she found me. I hope you don't feel scared anymore. You're not alone. Love, Ellie. 7 years old. Rick read it aloud, sitting beside Scarlet as she gnawed gently on a toy. She paused, tilted her head and placed her paw on his knee. It was the first time she'd done that, and he felt something stir deep inside him, a warmth, a pull. Scarlet had survived fire and silence and fear, and somehow she still believed people could be good. So Rick stayed, every day, sitting quietly, talking softly, brushing her fur with gentle hands. And every night when he returned home he thought about that moment in the parking lot. The heat, the silence, and the puppy who waited behind the glass until someone came. Scarlet had started to follow him now. It wasn't dramatic, no sprinting, no leaping into his arms, just slow, cautious steps, always a few feet behind, always watching. If Rick left the room, even for a moment, she would whimper softly, a sound low and fragile, like a whisper not meant to be heard. If he stayed, she curled beside him, nose tucked against his boot, as if the rhythm of his presence steadied her. Each day she grew a little more confident. The tentative steps became a steady walk. Her eyes, once dulled by heat and silence, began to flicker with curiosity. She sniffed the air when new people entered. She even began to play, timidly at first, batting at toys as though testing whether joy was real or a trick. But the change was unmistakable. She was healing. Yet every night, right before sleep, she paused. Rick would watch her from the chair in the corner of the recovery room as her head turned toward the glass wall. She would stare at it for a long moment, like she was checking, like she needed to make sure it was still open, that the world beyond wasn't sealed away again. One morning, the shelter director called Rick into her office. Her tone was kind, but formal. "Scarlet's progressing beautifully," she said. "She's officially cleared for adoption." Rick felt his stomach twist. He nodded automatically, but the words clung to him like a chill. "We've had several serious inquiries," the director continued. "One family even offered to drive in from Nevada." Rick opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He didn't know what to say, or how to say it. That German Shepherd puppy didn't look at them when they visited. She kept her eyes on him. Later that day, Rick sat on the grass outside the play yard while Scarlet wandered nearby. A young couple had come in, a bright, eager pair who had seen the viral video and followed the news coverage. They asked questions, filled out paperwork, and stood by the fence watching Scarlet explore. The shelter arranged a private meet and greet. Rick was invited to stay. A familiar presence, they'd said, so he stood off to the side, heart-pounding, watching. The couple knelt on the grass, speaking softly. They held out treats, called her name gently. Scarlet turned, ears perked, sniffed the air, and then trotted past them, straight to Rick. She didn't bark, didn't growl. She just sat beside him and leaned her full weight against his leg. He didn't move. The couple exchanged a glance, a pause, then a soft smile. "We totally understand," they said, their voices kind. "Looks like she already made her decision." After they left, Rick sat back down, legs stretched out in the shade. Scarlet padded over and curled up at his side, resting her chin on his knee like she always did. Her breath slowed, steady and quiet, safe. "You know this isn't fair," Rick whispered, running a hand along her back. "I didn't plan for this." But Scarlet didn't care about plans. She only cared that he had stayed. That night, Rick lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Every reason why he couldn't do it played like a chorus in his mind. Work, schedule, responsibility. He hadn't owned a dog in years. His kids were older now. His life was settled, quiet, predictable. He liked it that way, didn't he? But then he saw her again in his mind, in that car, curled on the back seat, surrounded by unbearable heat and silence, waiting for someone to care. He remembered the moment when he reached into that sweltering furnace and lifted her out. She hadn't resisted, hadn't fought. She had just melted into his arms like she belonged there, like she had chosen him. She didn't care about his doubts. She had already decided. The next morning, the adoption counsellor slid a folder across the desk toward him. Rick stared at it. His name was printed at the top. "She's yours, Rick," the counsellor said softly. "She's been waiting." Scarlet lay curled on a fleece mat in the corner of the room. Her eyes met his without blinking. When Rick reached for the pen, she stood slowly, padded over, and placed her paw gently on the table beside his hand. The room went quiet. He stared at the pads of her paws, burned not long ago, now healing. At the eyes that had once looked hollow and distant, now focused and clear. She wasn't asking. She was telling him, "I'm ready." Rick signed, and as the pen scratched across the page, he felt tears sliding down his face, quiet, uninvited. No sobs, just a few drops that surprised him more than anyone else. The staff clapped gently. Someone handed him a small bag with her vaccination records, a new tag, and a red collar with a tiny silver heart on it. "Welcome home, Scarlet," he whispered. She wagged her tail, not fast, but steady, sure, like she understood exactly what those words meant. They walked out of the shelter together, side by side. Rick held the leash loosely, but Scarlet didn't pull. She didn't pause. She simply matched his pace, step for step, like they had done this 1,000 times before. In the truck, she curled into the passenger seat, circled once, and let out the deepest, heaviest sigh Rick had ever heard from a living creature. It wasn't just tired. It was something deeper. It said, "I made it." The drive home was quiet. No music, just the hum of the engine and the soft rhythm of Scarlet's breathing beside him. Rick rested his hand on the seat between them, close enough for her to lean in if she wanted. She did. That German Shepherd puppy had been pulled from the loneliest, hottest place a soul could be left, and now she was his. But deep down, Rick knew the truth. He was hers all along. And somehow, against all odds, she had brought him home too. Every morning, when Rick opened the door to his garage, Scarlet trotted in like she owned the place. She did a quick loop, her nose sweeping the air, checking the toolboxes, sniffing the tires, then settling beneath the workbench like it was her second home. Maybe it was. The same place where Rick had spent years fixing engines and tuning carburetors now echoed with the quiet presence of a dog who had once waited behind glass, nearly forgotten. Clients started noticing. A few brought treats just for her. One regular, a man Rick had known for years, crouched beside her one afternoon and whispered, "You've got a miracle on your hands." Rick nodded. He didn't need convincing. It had been 3 months since he brought her home. Scarlet was fully healed now. Her stride was strong. Her eyes shone with curiosity. Her tail wagged in slow, confident rhythms. She was playful, almost fearless. But every now and then she still paused at windows, not with fear, with recognition. She would press her nose to the glass, stare for a few seconds, then turn to Rick like she was checking. Still here, still safe, still home. At night, she curled beside Rick's bed. Her breathing was slow and steady, her presence quiet but constant. Sometimes she twitched in her sleep. Her paws jerked, her nose wriggled, and Rick wondered what she saw in those dreams. The heat, the silence, the waiting. He would reach down gently and touch her back. Her body would relax, and her breathing would settle again. His kids adored her. His daughter, 17, said Scarlet was the most emotionally intelligent creature she'd ever met. His son had started teaching her tricks. She was terrible at rollover, but she had mastered stay. Maybe because it was her favorite thing, just being near the people she trusted. Rick often thought about how he'd almost walked away, how he'd nearly let her become someone else's dog. But Scarlet had made her choice long before he signed those adoption papers. She had chosen him in a sweltering parking lot, with nothing but a glass window between them. Rick hadn't just rescued her. She had reached across that invisible divide and rescued him too, dragged him out from silence, from routine, from the numbness he hadn't realized he'd been living in. One day a letter arrived at the shelter, addressed to Scarlet. It had been forwarded to Rick's house, along with a box of toys and a soft red blanket. He opened it slowly, sitting at the kitchen table while Scarlet gnawed lazily on a tennis ball. Inside was a card, neat purple ink on lined paper. "Dear Scarlet, I saw you on the internet. My mom says you're very brave. I was scared once too. When I got lost at the store, I cried until she found me. I hope you don't feel scared anymore. You're not alone. Love, Ellie. 7 years old." Rick read it aloud, his voice catching halfway through. Scarlet tilted her head. Then she walked over, placed her paw on his knee, and stared up at him like she understood every word. She always knew when something mattered. The shelter had continued to receive letters even months later. Some were from children, others from strangers who had watched the viral video and couldn't stop thinking about the puppy in the car. They sent toys, collars, hand-drawn pictures. A drawing of Scarlet beside a sun-drenched tree hung on Rick's fridge, signed from Lily, age 6. Rick never got used to it, the way people felt so deeply about a story they'd only seen in passing. But then again, it wasn't just a story. It was hope. It was a reminder that someone had stopped, that someone had cared, and that it had made all the difference. Scarlet had become a quiet legend in their little town, a living memory of something almost tragic that turned into something beautiful. But Rick didn't think about her in grand terms. He just knew that she was his dog now, his shadow in the shop, his quiet companion on evening walks, his reminder that life still had room for surprise and softness. Sometimes he'd catch her staring out the garage window, nose to the glass. She never pressed her paws to it anymore. She didn't need to, but Rick knew what she was doing, remembering. Not with fear, not with sadness, but with recognition of how far she had come, and how far they had come together. Scarlet's routine became part of Rick's own. She'd greet him in the morning with a thump of her tail against the hallway wall. She'd nudge his elbow during breakfast and trot beside him when he stepped into the garage. During lunch, she'd nap in the corner, twitching occasionally, her dreams soft and safe now. Rick sometimes sat beside her at night, stroking her fur while she slept. He'd think about the first time he saw her, small and trembling, pressed against the glass, silent and resigned. And then he'd look at her now, stretched out in peace, and wonder how he had ever lived without her. She didn't just live with him, she brought him back to life every single day. One afternoon, a woman entered Rick's shop with her car sputtering. She spotted Scarlet under the workbench and gasped, "Oh my God, is that the puppy?" "From the video?" Rick nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. "That's her." The woman knelt beside Scarlet, who stood slowly and sniffed her hand before settling again. "She looks amazing," the woman whispered. "I can't believe she's the same dog." Rick smiled. "She's even better." As the woman left, she turned back and said, "She's lucky you found her." Rick didn't answer right away. He glanced at Scarlet, then back at the woman. "Yeah," he finally said, "I'm lucky too." That night, Scarlet curled into her spot at the foot of the bed. Rick lay in the dark, listening to her breathing. He thought about the stillness she had once lived in, the heat, the waiting. She had made it, and so had he. 3 months had passed since Rick brought Scarlet home, and life had quietly shifted into something richer, fuller. The garage, once filled only with the scent of motor oil and the hum of tools, now carried the soft rhythm of paws padding across the concrete. Scarlet had claimed her space without demanding it, by being present, by being steady, by simply being there. She had healed, fully now. Her fur had grown back over the places once scorched. Her walk was confident, her bark clear and bright when she needed to use it. She'd become playful, alert, and curious. And yet there were still those small moments, at windows especially. She would pause, press her nose gently to the glass and look, not with fear anymore, but with remembrance. As if to say, "I remember where I came from. I remember what it felt like to wait." Then she'd turn and trot back to Rick like she always did, content to be where she was, beside the man who had never walked away. At night, she slept curled beside Rick's bed. Sometimes she dreamed, her paws twitching, her ears flicking, her nose wriggling in little spasms. Rick would reach down, brush his fingers gently along her back, and she'd settle again, soothed by the simple comfort of knowing she wasn't alone. Rick's kids loved her. His daughter called her the most emotionally intelligent creature on earth. His son had taken it upon himself to train her, though Scarlet remained impressively bad at rollover and impressively good at stay. Maybe because that was what she valued most, staying close, staying safe. Scarlet's presence changed things. Rick found himself humming again in the mornings. He noticed the colours in the sky on his drive to work. He lingered at the kitchen table longer than usual, coffee cooling in his mug while Scarlet rested her chin on his foot. Things he hadn't thought about in years, the quiet joy of connection, the warmth of routine that wasn't empty, slowly came back. One morning, Rick returned from the mailbox with an envelope addressed to Scarlet, CO the Miracle Garage. Inside was a note from a third-grade class in Oregon. The kids had seen her video and written messages on a giant fold-out card shaped like a dog bone. "You are so brave. I hope you have lots of treats. I'm glad you found your person." Rick read them all to Scarlet while she lay on the rug, tail thumping with each line. Another letter stood out, a folded sheet of notebook paper in small, careful handwriting. No return address, just a sentence. "You waited, and someone came. That means someone else is still waiting. I'm going to find them." Rick sat for a long time with that one. Scarlet had become more than a rescue, more than a survivor. She had become a symbol of hope for people she'd never meet, in places she'd never see. Her story, told in grainy footage and soft piano music, had reached hearts across the country. But none of that mattered to Scarlet. All she cared about was that Rick came home at night, that his boots thudded on the porch, that she could curl beside him and breathe in sync. One afternoon, as Rick changed the oil on a Civic, a delivery truck pulled up outside. The driver stepped out with a small package addressed to Scarlet. Inside were homemade dog treats, a hand-sewn bandana, and a card that read, "To the puppy who reminded me to keep believing." Rick placed the bandana around Scarlet's neck and stood back. She looked up at him, tail swaying, tongue lolling out the side of her mouth. She looked proud. Clients still asked if she was the dog from the video. Rick always said yes. He didn't try to hide it anymore. There was no point. Scarlet was the dog, the one who had waited behind glass, the one who had endured unbearable heat and unthinkable silence, the one who had survived. But survival wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning. Because loving a rescued dog isn't just about giving them a second chance. It's about responsibility. It's about patience and listening and choosing to show up, day after day, because someone once didn't. It's knowing that even when the past lingers in a look or a twitch in sleep, healing is still possible. Scarlet reminded Rick of that every day. She was a teacher in her own way. She taught him that sometimes silence hides suffering, that stillness doesn't mean surrender, that staying, truly staying, is a choice and one of the most powerful acts of love. Sometimes Rick would catch himself watching her the way she had once watched the world, quietly, curiously. He'd wonder how someone could have left her behind, how they could have walked away. But then he'd let that thought drift, replaced by something else, the fact that he hadn't. That in a moment when everyone else walked past, he had stopped, and that had made all the difference. He didn't consider himself a hero. He never had. He just saw a dog who needed help, and he'd acted. But the truth, deep down, was more complex. He had needed her too. He hadn't realized how much until much later. Until the silence in his home started to feel less like emptiness and more like peace. Until the shadows that used to creep in at night had been replaced by the sound of breathing. Until he found himself smiling for no reason, just because Scarlet had walked into the room with a squeaky toy and an expectant tail wag. She didn't just live with him, she lived for him. And in doing so, gave him something he hadn't known he was missing, a sense of being chosen, of being needed, of being loved without condition. Rick often thought about the moment he signed the adoption papers, about how Scarlet had walked up and placed her paw on the table. She hadn't asked for anything. She had simply said, "I'm ready," and she had been. But maybe for Rick, that moment had come even earlier, when her eyes met his through the heat-hazed window. When he'd knelt beside that car and whispered, "Help's coming." When she pressed her forehead to the glass, silent but believing. Maybe that was when he was chosen. When she reached through the worst moment of her life and gave him a reason to stay. Every day since then had been a continuation of that promise. To be there, to show up, to stay. Rick didn't know what the future held, but he knew this: Scarlet would be there, by his side, in the garage, in the silence. In the moments of joy and the ones of doubt. She had waited behind locked glass, her hope nearly extinguished, and now she was home, still here, still safe, always.